for the next headline, Foreign Direct Investment in Retailing in India.
Retailing structures in India was fragmented with a large number of small stores serving most of the market. Supply chains were poorly developed. In early 2012, the Indian federal government managed to secure approval for plans to allow foreign single-brand retailers to open wholly owned stores, but imposed the requirement of 30% of its inventory from India. Later in the same year, they allowed foreign investors to open multi-brand retail stores, but limited ownership to 51% and allowed 100% ownership of online retail marketplaces in the country. FDI in India's retail sector government policy has a dramatic impact on a firm's ability to invest directly in a foreign nation. Retailers from Nike and IKEA to Walmart and Tesco have long wanted to open retail stores in India, but have been kept at the bay by regulations. Recent changes in the laws governing FDI have now made it somewhat easier for foreigner retailers to enter India, but barriers still exist, which is not good for the Indian economy, consumers, or many producers within the country. Those barriers, however, do protect small retailers who are politically powerful. Why do enterprises undertake foreign direct investment? For the details of the report, here's Mr. Donelle Gaspar.
Thank you, Ms. Rey Jewel B. Again, I am Donelle Gaspar together with Mr. Topasi. We're here to discuss the important details about Chapter 8, which is Foreign Direct Investment. So, what is foreign direct investment? It happens when a firm invests directly in facilities to produce or market a good or service in a foreign country. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, FDI occurs whenever a U.S. citizen, organization, or affiliated group takes an interest of 10% or more in a foreign business entity. Once a firm undertakes FDI, it becomes a multinational enterprise. Multinational enterprise is an enterprise producing goods or delivering services in more than one country. The investments by IKEA and Amazon in India that were discussed in the opponent case were examples of FDI. This chapter begins by looking at the importance of FDI in the world economy, then moves on to look at government policy toward foreign direct investments. Next, types of foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investments are commonly categorized as horizontal, vertical, or conglomerate. Horizontal FDI is where funds are invested abroad in the same industry. In other words, a business invests in a foreign firm that produces similar goods. For instance, Nike, a US-based firm, may purchase Puma, a Germany-based firm. They are both in the industry of sportswear and therefore would be classified as a form of horizontal FDI. Next is vertical FDI. Vertical FDI is where an investment is made within the supply chain, but not directly in the same industry. In other words, a business invests in a foreign firm that it may supply or sell to. For instance, Hershey's, a US chocolate manufacturer, may look to invest in cocoa producers in Brazil. This is known as backwards vertical integration because the firm is purchasing a supplier or a potential supplier in the supply chain. Last is conglomerate FDI. Conglomerate FDI is where an investment is made in completely different industry. In other words, it is not linked in any direct way to the investor business. For instance, Walmart, a US retailer, may invest in BMW, a German automobile manufacturer. Next is advantages of foreign direct investment. First, economic growth. FDI boosts the manufacturing and services sector, which results in the creation of jobs and helps to reduce unemployment rates in the country. Increased employment translates to higher incomes and equips the population with more buying powers and boosting the overall economy of a country. Second, Human capital development. Human capital involves the knowledge and competence of a workforce. Skills that employees gain through training and experience can boost the education and human capital of a specific country. Through a ripple effect, it can train human resources in other sectors and companies. Third is technology. Targeted countries and businesses receive access to the latest financing tools, technologies, and operational practices from all across the world. The introduction of newer and enhanced technologies results in companies' distribution into the local economy, resulting in enhanced efficiency and effectiveness of the industry. Fourth is improved capital flow. Inflow of capital is particularly beneficial for countries with limited domestic resources, as well as for nations with restricted opportunities to raise funds in global capital markets. Last is creation of competitive market. FDI helps create a competitive environment as well as break domestic monopolies. A healthy competitive environment pushes firms to continuously enhance their processes and products offerings, thereby fostering innovations. Consumers also gain access to a wider range of competitively priced products. Next is about political ideology and foreign direct investment. What is political ideology? Political ideology is a certain set of ethical ideas, principles, doctrines, myths, or symbols of a social movement, institution, class, or large group that explains how society should work and offers some political and cultural blueprint for a certain social order. Historically, political ideology toward FDI within a nation has ranged from a dogmatic radical stance that is hostile to all inward FDI at one extreme to an adherence to the non-interventionist principle of free market economics at the other. Between these two extremes in approach that might be called pragmatic nationalism. First is radical view. Radical writers argue that the multinational enterprise is an instrument of imperialist domination. They see the multinational enterprise as a tool of exploiting host countries to the exclusive benefit of their capitalist imperialist home countries. They argue that multinational enterprises extract profits from the host country and take them to their home country, giving nothing of value to the host country in exchange. For example, that key technology is tightly controlled by the MNE and that important jobs in the foreign subsidiaries of MNEs go to home country nationals rather than to citizens of the host country. Because of this, according to the radical view, FDI by the MNEs of advanced capitalist nations keeps the less developed countries of the world relatively backward and dependent on advanced capitalist nations for investment, jobs, and technology. Thus, according to the extreme version of this view, no country should ever permit foreign corporations to undertake FDI because they can never be instrument of economic development, only of economic domination. Where MNEs already exist in the country, they should be immediately nationalized. Second is free market view. Free market view argues that international production should be distributed among countries according to the theory of comparative advantage. Countries should specialize in the production of those goods and services that they can produce most efficiently. With this framework, the MNE is an instrument for dispersing the production of goods and services to the most efficient location around the world. Viewed this way, FDI by the MNE increases overall efficiency of the world economy. Last, pragmatic nationalism. In practice, many countries have adopted neither a radical policy nor a free market policy toward FDI, but instead, a policy that can best be described as pragmatic nationalism. The pragmatic nationalist view is that FDI has both benefits and costs. FDI can benefit a host country by bringing capital, skills, technology, and jobs, but those benefits come at cost. When a foreign company rather than a domestic company produces products, the profit from the investment go abroad. Many countries are also concerned that a foreign-owned manufacturing plant may import many components from its home country, which has negative implications for the host country's balance of payment positions. Next is about benefits and costs of FDI. First, resource transfer effects. With regard to capital, many MNEs, by virtue of their large size and financial strength, have access to financial resources not available to host country firms. These funds may be available from internal company resources, or because of their reputation, large MNEs may find it easier to borrow money from capital markets than host country firms would. As for technology can take two forms, both of which are valuable. Technology can be incorporated in a production process. However, many countries lack the research and development resources and skill required to develop their own indigenous product and process technology. This is particularly true in less developed nations. Such countries must rely on advanced industrialized nations for much of the technology required to stimulate economic growth, and FDI can provide it. Second is employment effects. Direct effects arise when a foreign MNE employs a number of host country citizens. Indirect effects arise when jobs are created in local suppliers as a result of the investment, and when jobs are created because of increased local spending by employees of the MNE. The indirect employment effects are often as large as, if not larger than, or the direct effects. May I introduce Mr. Jayvee Topasi to continue this topic.
Thank you, Donelle. For the continuation, balance of payments effects. FDI's effect on a country's balance of payments is an important policy issue for most host governments. A country's balance of payments accounts track both its payment and its receipts from other countries. Governments normally are concerned when their country is running a deficit, the current account on their balance of payments. The current account tracks the export and import of goods and services. A current account deficit or a trade deficit is as it's often arises when a country is importing more goods and services than it's exporting. Governments typically prefer to see a current account surplus rather than a deficit. Second is effect on competition and economic growth. Economic theory tells us that the efficient functioning of markets depends on adequate level of competition between producers. When FDI takes the form of greenfield investment, the result is to establish a new enterprise, increasing the number of players in a market, and thus consumer choice. In turn, this can increase the level of competition in a national market, thereby driving down prices and increasing the economic welfare of consumers. Increased competition tends to stimulate capital investment by firms in plant equipment and R&D as they struggle to gain an edge over their rivals. The long-term results may include increased productivity growth, product and process innovations, and greater economic growth. Let's proceed to the host country costs. Three costs of FDI concern host countries. They arise from possible adverse effects on competition within the host nation, the adverse effects of the balance of payments, and the perceived loss of national sovereignty and autonomy. The next is the home country benefits. The benefits of FDI to the home or source country arise from three sources. First is the home country's balance of payments benefits from inward flow of foreign earnings. Second, benefits to the home country from outward FDI arise from employment effects. As with the balance of payments, positive employment effects arise when the foreign subsidiary creates demand or home country exports. Thirdly is arise when the home country MNE learns valuable skills from its exposure to foreign markets that can subsequently be transferred back to the home country. And now the home country cost. Against these benefits must be set from the apparent cost of FDI from the home or source country. The most important concern center on the balance of payments and employment effects of upward FDI. The home country's balance of payments may suffer in three ways. First, the balance of payments suffers from the initial capital outflow required to finance the FDI. This effect, however, is usually more than offset by subsequent inflow of foreign earnings. Second, the current account of the balance of payments suffers in the purpose of the foreign investment is to serve to the home country from a low-cost production location. Third, the current account of the balance payment suffers if the FDI is a substitute for direct exports. So the next is the government policy instruments and FDI. We have reviewed the cost of benefits of FDI from the perspective of both home country and host country. We now turn our attention to the policy instruments that home or source country and host countries can use to regulate FDI. And the home country policies, though their choice of policies, home countries can both encourage and restrict FDI by local firms. We look at policies designed to encourage outward FDI first. These include foreign risk insurance, capital assistance, tax incentives, and political pressure. Then we look at the policies designed to restrict outward FDI. Encouraging outward FDI. Many investor nations now have government-backed insurance programs to cover major types of foreign investment risk. The types of risks insurable through these programs include the risk of expropriation or nationalization, war losses, and the inability to transfer profits back home. Such programs are particularly encouraging firms to undertake investments in politically unstable countries. In addition, several advanced countries also have special funds or banks that make government loans to firms wishing to invest in developing countries. Restricting outward FDI. Virtually all investors' countries, including the United States, have exercised some control over outward FDI from time to time. One policy has been to limit capital outflows out of concern of countries' balance of payments. And now let's proceed to the host country policies. Host countries adopt policies designed both to restrict and to encourage inward FDI. As noted earlier in this chapter, political ideology has determined the type and scope of these policies in the past. In the last decade of the 20th century, many countries moved quickly away from adhering to some version of the radical stance and prohibiting much FDI toward a situation where a combination of free market objectives and pragmatic nationalism took hold. The first policy is encouraging inward FDI. It is common for governments to offer incentives to foreign firms to invest in their countries. Such incentives take many forms, but the most common are tax concessions, low-interest loans, and grants for subsidies. Incentives are motivated by a desire to gain from the resource transfer and employment effects of FDI. Secondly is restricting inward FDI. Host governments use a wide range of controls to restrict FDI in one way or another. The two most common are ownership restraints and performance requirements. Ownership restraints can take several forms. In some countries, foreign companies are excluded from specific fields. They are excluded from the tobacco and mining in Sweden, and from the development of certain natural resources in Brazil, Finland, and Morocco. In other industries, foreign ownership may be permitted, although a significant proportion of the equity of the subsidiary must be owned by local investors. FDI and government policy. Several implications for business are inherent in the material discussed in this chapter. In this section, we deal first with the implications of the theory and then turn our attention to the implications of government policy. The theory of FDI. The implications of the theories of FDI for business practice are straightforward. First, the location-specific advantage argument associated with John Dunning does help explain the direction of FDI. However, the location-specific advantage argument does not explain why firms prefer FDI to licensing or exporting. In this regard, from both an explanatory and business perspective, perhaps the most useful theories are those that focus on the limitations of exporting and licensing. That is, internalization theories. These theories are useful because they identify with some precision how the relative profitability of foreign direct investments, exporting and licensing varies with circumstances. The government policy. A host government's attitude toward FDI should be an important variable in decisions about where to locate foreign production facilities and where to make foreign direct investment. On other things being equal, investing in countries that have permissive policies toward FDI is clearly preferable to investing in countries that restrict FDI.
For the last headline, renegotiating NAFTA.
During the presidential campaign in 2016, Donald Trump repeatedly criticized the North American Free Trade Agreement, or the NAFTA, as an unfair deal in which Americans had been taken to the cleaners by Mexico. Trump claimed that NAFTA had cost American manufacturers millions of jobs. Now that he is the president, Trump shows every intention of sticking to his promise to renegotiate the NAFTA deal. This has sent shockwaves through industry on both sides of the border. Going back, Canada, Mexico, and the United States entered into NAFTA on January 1, 1994. NAFTA aims to remove all barriers to the free flow of goods and services among the three countries. While the implementation of NAFTA has resulted in job losses in some sectors of the United States economy in aggregate and consistent with the prediction of international trade theory, most economists argue that the benefits of greater regional trade outweighed any costs. The administration of President Donald Trump is overtly hostile to NAFTA in its present form, blaming it for significant job losses in the United States. As with Brexit and the European Union, Trump's 2016 victory in the US presidential election means that the future of NAFTA is now in doubt. For the details of this report, here's Ms. Melanie Sumanga.
Thanks again, Jewel, for sharing us the opening case for this chapter. So, in this chapter, we will explore the economic and political debate surrounding regional economic integration. And for the first topic of this chapter, as you can see in the presentation, there is a figure there that shows the levels of economic integration. The first one is free trade area. In this level, all barriers to the trade of goods and services among members or countries are removed. And secondly, the next level is custom union. In this level, it eliminates trade barriers between members and countries, and it adopts a common external trade policy. And the third level is common market. In this level, there is no barriers to trade among members of countries. And also, it includes a common external policy. And for the fourth level, economic union. In this level, it involves the free flow of products and factors of production among members or countries. And the adoption of a common external trade policy is shown in this level. And lastly, political union. In this level, which a central political apparatus coordinates the economic, social, and foreign policy of the members states. And for the next topic in this chapter, Miss Jewel Haring will discuss it.
Thank you, Ms. Melanie. In February 1992, European country members signed the Maastricht Treaty, which committed them to adopting a common currency by January 1, 1999. The euro is now used by 19 of the 28 member states of the European Union. These 19 states are members of what is often referred to as the Eurozone. It encompasses 330 million European Union citizens and includes the powerful economies of Germany and France. Establishment of the euro was a remarkable political feat with few historical precedents. It required participating national governments to give up their own currencies and national control over monetary policy. Government do not routinely sacrifice national sovereignty for the greater good, indicating the importance that the Europeans attach to the euro. By adopting the euro, the European Union has created the second most widely traded currencies in the world after that of the US dollar. European Union's monetary policy is well managed. The Maastricht Treaty called for the establishment of the Independent European Central Bank, or the ECB, similar in some respects to the US Federal Reserve, with a clear mandate to manage monetary policy so as to ensure price stability. The ECB based in Frankfurt is meant to be independent from political pressure. Among other things, the ECB sets interest rates and determines monetary policy across the Eurozone. Enlargement of the European Union into Eastern Europe has been discussed since the collapse of communism at the end of the 1980s. By the end of the 1990s, 13 countries had applied to become European Union members. To qualify for European Union membership, the applicants had to privatize states' assets, deregulate markets, restructure industries, and tame inflation. They also had to enshrine complex European Union laws into their own system, establish stable democratic governments, and respect human rights. In December 2002, the European Union formally agreed to accept the applications of 10 countries, and they joined May 1, 2004. The new members included the Baltic countries, the Czech Republic, and the larger nations of Hungary and Poland. The only new member not in Eastern Europe were the Mediterranean island nations of Malta and Cyprus. In 2007, Bulgaria and Romania joined, and in 2013, Croatia joined, bringing total membership to 28 nations. The British electorate voted in a national referendum to leave the European Union. In early 2017, the British government formally notified the European Union of its intention to exit. Under the Treaty of Lisbon, it now has 2 years to negotiate the term of exit with the European Union. While the British have enjoyed the benefits of free trade within Europe, a segment of the population has never been comfortable with the loss of national sovereignty implied by the membership within the European Union. The British have often railed against regulation imposed by the European Union bureaucracy in Brussels. And more recently, immigration has become a key issue. Many of the immigrants have been low-skilled and work in restaurants, hotels, and retail stores. The Campaign for Leaving the European Union claimed that exit would allow the British to take back control of immigration. In the referendum, London, Scotland, and Northern Ireland voted to stay in the European Union, whereas most of the rest of the country voted for exit. The vote was also split by age and education. The younger and the more educated voted to stay in the European Union, while the older and less educated voted to leave. The governments of the United States and Canada in 1988 agreed to enter into a free trade agreement, which took effect January 1, 1989. The goal of the agreement was to eliminate all tariffs on bilateral trade between Canada and the United States by 1988. This was followed in 1991 by talks among the United States, Canada, and Mexico aimed at establishing a North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, for 3 countries. The talks concluded in August 1991 1992 with an agreement in principle, and the following year, the agreement was ratified by the governments of the three countries. Proponents of NAFTA have argued that the free trade area should be viewed as an opportunity to create an enlarged and more efficient productive base for the entire region. Advocates acknowledge that one effect of NAFTA would be that some US and Canadian firms would move production to Mexico to take advantage of lower labor costs. Those who oppose NAFTA claim that ratification would be followed by a mass exodus of jobs from the United States and Canada into Mexico as employers sought to profit from Mexico's lower wages and less strict environmental and labor laws. According to one extreme opponent, Ross Perot, up to 5.9 million US jobs would be lost to Mexico after NAFTA in what he famously characterized as giant sucking sound. Environmentalists also voiced concerns about NAFTA. They pointed to the sludge in the Rio Grande and the smog in the air over Mexico City and warned that Mexico could degrade clean air and toxic waste standards across the continent. They pointed out that the lower Rio Grande was the most polluted river in the United States, and that with NAFTA, chemical waste and sewage would increase along in its course from El Paso, Texas to the Gulf of Mexico. There was also opposition in Mexico to NAFTA from those who feared a loss of national sovereignty. Mexican critics argued that their country would be dominated by US firms that would not really contribute to Mexico's economic growth, but instead would use Mexico as a low-cost assembly site, while keeping their high-paying, high-skilled jobs north of the border. The worst-case scenario would be if NAFTA collapsed, which is possible if a trade war between the United States and Mexico breaks out. In the absence of NAFTA, trade between the United States and Mexico would be governed by World Trade Organization rules, which would suggest tariffs of around 5%. That in itself is probably manageable. The Trump administration has floated the idea of imposing much higher tariffs on Mexican imports. Not only would such tariff raise prices to US consumers, but if such tariffs were imposed, Mexico would probably respond with tariffs of its own on US imports. Since Mexico is the second largest exports market for the United States, purchasing $212 billion of US dollars, goods and services, in 2015, such retaliatory tariffs would have negative consequences for many US producers and their employees, and would have a certain harmful effect on US economy. In short, a trade war between the United States and Mexico that results in the collapse of NAFTA would not be in the economic interest of the United States or Mexico. Bolivia, Chile, Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru signed an agreement in 1969 to create the ANDEAN Pact. The ANDEAN community was largely based on the European Union model, but was far less successful at achieving its stated goals. The integration steps begun in 1969 included an internal tariff reduction program, a common external tariff, a transportation policy, a common industrial policy, and special concessions for the smallest members, Bolivia and Ecuador. Mercosur originated in 1988 as a free trade pact between Brazil and Argentina. The modest reduction in tariffs and quotas accompanying this pact reportedly helped bring out an 80% increase in trade between the two countries in the late 1980s. Mercosur originated in 1988 as a free trade pact between Caribbean Community and Common Market or CARICOM established in 1973. A custom union was to have been created in 1991 among the English-speaking Caribbean countries under the auspices of the Caribbean Community. In October 1991, the CARICOM governments failed for the third consecutive times to meet deadline for establishing a common external tariff. Despite this, CARICOM expanded to 50 members by 2005. In early 2006, 6 CARICOM members established the Caribbean Single Market and Economy, or the CSME, Modeled on the European Union single market, CMS's goal is to lower trade barriers and harmonize macroeconomic and monetary policy between member states. Formed in 1967, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or the ASEAN, includes Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, and Cambodia have all joined recently, creating a regional grouping of 600 million people with a combined GDP of some $2 trillion. The basic objective of ASEAN is to foster free trade among member countries and to achieve cooperation in their industrial policies. A meaningful attempt to re-energize the free trade movement in Africa occurred in early 2001, when Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, member states of the East African Community, or the EAC, committed themselves to relaunching their bloc 24 years after it collapsed. The three countries with 80 million inhabitants intend to establish a common customs union, regional court, legislative assembly, and eventually a political federation. Their program includes cooperation on immigration, road and telecommunication networks, investment, and capital markets. However, while local business leaders welcomed the relaunch as a positive step, they were critical of the EAC's failure to practice to make progress on free trade. The United States and many other nations have placed renewed emphasis on bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. Under President Obama, the United States was pursuing two major multilateral trade agreements, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the TPP, with 11 other Pacific Rim countries including Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, and Chile, and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or the TTIP, with the European Union. And that's all for today's report. Again, I am Rey Jewel B from the third group reporting.